Was his message more important today now than ever? And why, despite a national profile, had he become a footnote to history?
Whitney Moore Young Jr. was born in Shelby County, Kentucky in 1921.
Young's talent for enlisting conservative white businessmen in the cause of integration began in 1947 when he took an industrial relations job at an affiliate of the National Urban League, an organization founded a half-century earlier to help black migrants find jobs and housing in the North.
At the University of Minnesota, where he got his master's degree in social work in 1947, and then he volunteered for the St. Paul branch of the National Urban League. He was then appointed to the leadership position in that branch. In 1950, Young became the president of the National Urban League branch of Omaha, Nebraska.
He transformed the Urban League movement into a civil rights organization as well as a community service organization.
The value of an urban league, therefore, is that you have an ongoing vehicle, an institution for responsible communication between responsible white and Negro citizens meeting together on a peer basis with mutual respect.
In 1961, at the age of 40, Young became an executive director of the National Urban League. Within 4 years, he expanded the organization from 38 employees to over 1,600. The annual budget was $325,000, and by the end it was $6.1 million. And he was the president of the National Urban League from 1961 until his death in 1971.
Many of the things that we have today as black Americans, we would not have but for Whitney Young.
The Urban League has got to be supported. We must understand the distinction between rhetoric and relevance, between charisma and character, between symbols and substance, between protests and programs. We've got to be serious. We've got to take care of business. What we in the Urban League say about black power, that power comes to one not from being black or white, but it's the green of a dollar bill or the maroon of a textbook, or it is the ballot in the ballot box.
The Urban League was certainly one of those places where corporate America felt most comfortable.
What he did was bring onto the board white people of greater influence than had been on the board before, which meant more money for the league. It meant more influential people acting on behalf of the league everywhere.
You had persons like Henry Ford from the Ford Motor Company and James Lennon from Time Life that had not contributed to the Urban League and other civil rights movement projects to get involved.
That his focus was different. His focus for the black community was more with corporate America, more on an economic-based revolution.
All we're asking is that the same conscious, deliberate effort which was used for years to exclude Negroes now be used to include Negroes in the mainstream of American life.
If you think about a struggle between black and white people, if you can't talk to the white people, nothing's going to happen. And he was able to talk to white people, particularly well-to-do white people, business people, who may have had an interest in settling racial problems but couldn't see it themselves until Whitney Young came along and explained it to them and said, listen, you have a stake in this too.
Whitney understood power, and he understood politics, and most of all, he understood people. They said Martin was in the streets and Roy and Thurgood were in the courts, and Whitney was in the boardroom. One could not have been successful without the other. He understood that you had to do something about poverty, you had to do something about education, you had to do something about health care.
Whitney Young's influence went far beyond what people would consider to be the influence of a 1960s civil rights leader, the leader of an organization like the National Urban League, because he influenced what Congress did. He influenced what the president did, what mayors did, because of his ideas.
He changed the nation, creating thousands of new jobs and opening the doors of corporate America to minorities and women. Yet few today know his name.
In 1961, a brash 39-year-old social worker named Whitney Young Jr. set out to break the color barrier in corporate America.
Civil rights, which are God-given and constitutionally guaranteed, are not negotiable in 1963.
The civil rights movement brought together men of power, Some inspired,
thank God Almighty, we are free.
Others defied.
But they're dissatisfied with these Negroes who have been sitting around here posing as leaders and actually making the problem worse instead of making the problem better.
But one man stood alone, bringing the power of the boardroom and the White House to the people. The man was Whitney Young, the former executive director of the National Urban League, a leading civil rights organization.
Whitney Young was both a strategist, an architect of the Great Society programs.
I think it was under Whitney that corporate America was comfortable.
I don't think any other leader, could have done what he did.
But we also need, at the same time, if this is to have any meaning, a re-examination of the education of white people, to teach white people what it means to live in a democratic society.
Young also served as the president of the National Association of Social Work, the NASW, from 1969 to 1971.
He saw the civil rights movement, the various organizations and movement, each having a very important and critical role to play.
He had a way of using his sense of humor to highlight the little differences and have people laugh it off.
He understood that even though this black nationalist and I'm a black Democrat or even a Republican, we're going to deal with the issues of black people. And we're going to fuss and fight, sure. But in the end, there are things we can agree upon, and those things we will do together.
My father was given the opportunity to have the ear of 3 presidents, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, who held him in the highest esteem, not out of obligation, not because of his charisma.
Whenever the group met with the president, Whitney Young was there. They couldn't do without him.
Young was the dean of the School of Social Work at Clark Atlanta University, which is now named after him. The school has a solid history of social work, graduating the leader of the profession and having created and founded the Afrocentric perspective of social work and a frequently used theory practice in the urban areas. In his last column as president of the NASW, Young wrote, "Whatever we do, we should tell the public what we are doing and why. They have to hear from the social worker as much as they hear from the reporters and public officials."
His power was based on the ability to unite people, not divide them. He was called a relevant radical by some, and Uncle Tom by others, a power broker, a doer, an enigma. Even his untimely death at age 49 was puzzling. President Nixon, giving his eulogy, said, "Young wasn't a patient man, but he knew the value of patience."
Whitney Young's genius was he knew how to accomplish what other people were merely for.